Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Daf 13 of the Masechet Tractate Teruma, using Steinsaltz edition. So let's dive straight in. So we're talking previously about a Beit HaPeres, extended over 3 fields. The field that was ploughed and the 2 adjacent fields in the direction it was ploughed. For example, if one ploughed the field from north to south, each of the fields adjacent to it on the north and south is also considered Beit HaPeres. But whereas the ploughed field is a Beit HaPeres in its entirety, and 2 adjacent fields are Beit HaPeres only to the extent of 2 furrows, 1 furrow on each side. And how much is the full length of a furrow? A ma'ana. Ma'ana is connected to the act of ploughing in a field, and although its precise meaning is a matter of dispute among the only commentaries, some say it means furrow, and therefore the phrase "the length of a furrow" is the area of a furrow ploughed in the act of one act of ploughing, says Rashi. Others claim that it refers to the sign when the one who ploughs marks in the ground to indicate the exact place he wants to plough in his field, says the Ran. There is no practical difference between these two interpretations with regard to the matter at hand. It is 100 cubits, as is taught in the Mishnah Oholot 17:1. One who ploughs a field containing a grave, and who may have strewn the bones throughout the field, renders the field a Beit HaPeres, up to the full length of a furrow, which is 100 cubits. Mea Amma, 100 cubits. A field in which a grave was ploughed becomes a Beit HaPeres only to the distance of 100 cubits from the location of the grave. A Beit HaPeres does not create another Beit HaPeres. I.e., if one ploughed beyond 100 cubits, air from 100 cubits and onward is richly pure, as bones are not dragged in this manner further to that distance, and that's from the Ram Sefer Tahara Hilchot Tumas Meis 10:1-3. The Mishnah teaches, and there is no teruma after teruma. Once one designated produce from his crop as teruma, if he then designates additional produce from that crop as teruma, it is not teruma. I will explain whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah. It's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, as we learn in the Mishnah Teruma 3:3. In the case of joint ownership of produce who separate teruma one after the other, if 2 partners own produce and one of them separates teruma without the knowledge of the other, and the second then separates teruma himself, if they rely on each other with regard to teruma, the teruma of the second part is not teruma. In a case where they do not rely on one another, if the first one separated the correct amount, i.e. 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th, except by the same divided by the case of Mishnah, the teruma of the second part is not teruma. If the first partner did not separate the correct amount, and it's separated by both of them as teruma. This is according to the opinion of the rabbis, following the explanation of their opinion in the Jewish Talmud in the Sefer Zerayim 4:8. Since the Rabbi Elazar says the teruma of both of them is teruma, as each is considered to have separated from his share of the produce. Rabbi Akiva says the teruma of neither of them is teruma. Rabbi Akiva Omer ein teruma shneihim teruma. The early commentators disagree with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Some say that not even the teruma of the first part is teruma, or the fact that the second part separated teruma demonstrates that he did not accept the fact of the first one. One cannot separate teruma without the owner's consent. The same applies to teruma of the second part, says Rashi. Others maintain that each partner gave the other permission to separate teruma, and the teruma of the first is teruma, but the teruma of the second is not teruma. This is due to the fact that he's already given this permission to the first who set aside the teruma. When partners did not give each other permission, it's assumed that each separated from his share, and therefore the teruma of each is teruma, but only for his part of the produce. Conversely, according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, even if they gave each other permission, the teruma of each is effective only with regard to his share. The fact that ultimately they both set aside teruma indicates that they did not accept the teruma of the other. Therefore, their actions apply only to the amount they own of the produce he touched for. i.e. 1/50th of the produce. The produce is thereby tithe, and therefore the teruma of the second is not teruma. But if the first did not separate teruma of the correct measure, and he separated too little, teruma of the second is teruma. The Mishnah teaches that a substitute animal is consecrated when the substitute of a consecrated animal does not render a non-sacred animal exchange for a substitute, rather it remains non-sacred. The Gemara explains what is the reason, i.e. the source for this halach in the Torah. The verse states, and if he substitutes an animal for an animal, then both it and that for which it's substituted shall be sacred. with 27:10. The verse teaches that the halacha of substitution applies only to a consecrated animal and a substitute, but not the substitute of its substitute. The Mishnah teaches, and the offspring born of a consecrated animal that was not consecrated does not render a non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute. The Gemara explains the reason for this is that the verse states, then both it and that for which it is substitute shall be sacred. The verse is 27:10, which teaches that only it, a consecrated animal, but not its offspring, renders a non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute. I'm not sure we said this footnote. Some commentators explain that this measure refers to the average amount of teruma, which is 1/50th, i.e. 2%. If he separates teruma sparingly by 1/60th, even the second partner's teruma, others maintain that even if teruma is 1/60th, although considered miserly, it is included in the measure of teruma. Different interpretations often in Jerusalem Talmud teruma 3:2. If one partner separates teruma of the same measure as the other, since both partners have the same amount in mind, the act of the first partner is valid, and this teruma is teruma. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehuda says, the offspring renders a non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute. The Gemara explains that Rabbi Yehuda reasons that when the verse states, shall be sacred, this serves to include the offspring, and the Gemara adds, and as for the rabbis, who hold that one cannot substitute for the offspring of a consecrated animal, they maintain that this phrase serves to include one who substitutes unwittingly, so that the substitution is valid as if he done so intentionally. The bird sacrifices offerings, i.e. doves and pigeons, and meal offerings do not render non-sacred animals exchange for them substitutes. What's the footnote here? Bird sacrifices offerings and meal offerings do not render non-sacred items exchange for them substitutes, as the term animal in the verse does not apply to them. And if Kabbalah Hilchot Teruma 1:11. But only the term an animal stated with regard to substitute in the verse, and if you substitute an animal for an animal in the verse of 27:10, a consecrated animal belonging to the community or to partners does not render non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute. Although it is prohibited to perform substitution with consecrated animals belonging to the community or to partners, transgressed and did so, that a non-sacred animal exchange for it is not rendered a substitute. Rambam Sefer Kabbalah Hilchot Teruma 1:12. As it states in the same verse, he shall neither exchange it nor substitute it. The later commentators question this exposition. This verse is divided into two halves. First, it states he shall neither exchange nor substitute it. This refers to the prohibition whose violation entails liability to receive lashes. It then states, when we substitute an animal for an animal, then both it and that for which is substitute shall be sacred. This is the halacha that the animal is consecrated despite the prohibition. Since the Mishnah is dealing with the issue of sanctity, or in a case of an animal belonging to the community or to partners, we should have divided halach from the last section of the verse which refers to this matter, which is also stated in a singular form. As it stands, one might conclude from this exposition that one who performs substitution with an animal of a community or partner does not receive lashes, whereas the Rambam maintains that he is liable to receive lashes. The commentators further know that although the Mishnah excludes from substitution a communal offering or one owned by partners due to the phrase in the verse, he shall neither exchange it nor substitute it in Tod Kohanim, it is stated more precisely that a communal offering is excluded by the phrase, he shall neither exchange it, while the offering of partners is excluded by the expression nor substitute it, seen Malbim, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. It excludes these two types of offerings based on the exposition of substitution to animal tithe. The two phrases in this verse are expounded as stated on 9a. I shall neither exchange it. This is referring to substituting his animal with that of others. Nor substitute is referring to substituting the animal with his own, or yasha. Or hayasha. One derives from the singular pronoun in the verse that the individual renders a non-sacred animal a substitute, but the community and partners do not render a non-sacred animal a substitute. Unconsecrated for temple maintenance do not render non-sacred items exchange for them substitutes. Items consecrated to temple maintenance do not render non-sacred items substitutes, as a halacha substitution applies only to animals consecrated for the old house. So, if one had before him a non-sacred animal and an animal consecrated for temple maintenance and said, the animal is exchanged for that, or the substitutes for that, this statement is of no effect. Rambam Sefer Kabbalah Hilchot Teruma 1:12. 7:7. Rabbi Shimon said, the fact that animals belonging to the community or partners do not render animal exchange for them substitutes is derived as follows: the animal tithe, and Rabbi Shimon v'Hare Maaseh. The commentaries are put by Rabbi Shimon's claim that it was not necessary for the verse to repeat the halachas of Jews with regard to the animal tithe. And it was explained simply that had the verse not done so, one might have thought that substitution applies only to an animal consecrated by a person and not to an animal's consecration by the Torah. Indeed, the animal tithe. In the case of an animal tithe, the 10th animal that emerges from the pen is sacred, whether or not one labeled it the 10th. And some explain that even in the case of an animal tithe, the consecration is partly due to human intervention, as you must pass them before him for the animal tithe to take effect. As long as he does not do so, there is no animal tithe, and contrary to produce, animals are not considered untithed and prohibited until he has separated the animal tithe from them. What's going to mincha hen was included in the category of all offerings, and why was singled out in the verse, and all of the tithe of the herd or the flock, whatever passes under the rod, the tenth shall be sacred unto the Lord. He shall not inquire whether it is good or bad, neither shall he substitute for it, and if he substitutes it, both it and that for which it substitutes shall be sacred. Leviticus 27:32-33, Rabbi Shimon explains, it was singled out to juxtapose substitution to animal tithe to tell you, just the animal tithe is brought exclusively as an individual offering, so do all offerings that render the substitute sacred are individual offerings, including communal offerings and the offering of partners from the law of substitution. And just as the animal tithe is an offering sacrificed on the altar, so do all the offerings render the substitute sacred offering sacrificed on the altar, excluding items consecrated to temple maintenance from the halacha of substitution. According to the Mishnah, items consecrated to temple maintenance do not render non-sacred exchange them for substitutes. The sages taught in the Braita, one might have thought that items consecrated to temple maintenance render non-sacred items exchanged for them substitutes. Therefore, the verse states, and if it is an animal of which men bring an offering to the Lord, he shall not alter it, nor substitute it good for bad. Leviticus 27:9-10 teaches that the halacha of substitution applies to all that which is called an offering, excluding items consecrated to temple maintenance, which is not called an offering. The Gemara asks, but are items consecrated to temple maintenance not called offerings? But in the Torah Braita, the verse states with regard to sacrificial animals, or who slaughters it outside the camp, and has not brought it to the entrance of the meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, Leviticus 17:3-4. If the verse had mentioned the word offering, I would derive that the prohibition against slaughtering outside the temple applies even to items consecrated for temple maintenance, as they too are called offerings, as is stated in the manner of the spoils of the war against Midian. And we have brought the Lord's offering, what every man has gotten, of jewels of gold, armlets, bracelets, signet rings, and earrings, and girdles, to make an atonement for ourselves before the Lord. Numbers 31:50. These are certainly not items consecrated for the altar. The Braita continues, and therefore the verse states, unto the entrance of the tent of meeting he did not bring it, Leviticus 17:4, to teach that any item that is fit to come to the entrance of the tent of meeting, i.e. is fit to be sacrificed, one is liable for it due to the prohibition against slaughtering offerings outside the temple courtyard. One who slaughters sacrificial animals outside the temple courtyard is liable to receive kohet if he acted intentionally, or to bring a sin offering if he acted unwittingly. This prohibition applies to animals fit for sacrifice on the altar. If one slaughters an animal that is prohibited to be sacrificed on the altar, or one of the sin offerings must be left to die, he is exempt. This is derived from the verse before the tabernacle of the Lord, Leviticus 17:4, which indicates that one is not liable for slaughtering an animal as unfit to be sacrificed on the Rambam Sefer Avoda, 18:6. And by contrast, for any animal that is not fit to come to the entrance of the meeting, one is not liable for it due to the prohibition against slaughtering offerings outside in the temple courtyard. Evidently, as a verse is necessary to exclude items consecrated to temple maintenance, such items are generally called an offering. According to the first Braita cited, Rabbi Hanina said this is not difficult. The second Braita is according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, whereas the first Braita is according to the rabbis. According to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, items consecrated to temple maintenance are in fact called an offering, and therefore, in the Mishnah, he derives that items consecrated to temple maintenance are excluded from the halacha of substitution, from the juxtaposition from the animal tithe, not from the word offering. According to the opinion of the rabbis, items consecrated to temple maintenance are not called an offering, and they therefore derive the halacha from the word offering. The Gemara asks, And according to the opinion of the rabbis, aren't items consecrated to temple maintenance not called an offering, but it is written, and we have brought the Lord's offering, Numbers 30:50. The Gemara answers these items are called the Lord's offering, but they are not called an offering to the Lord, which is used only with regard to offering sacrifice upon the altar. The Mishnah teaches that consecrated animals belonging to the community of the partners are not included in the halacha of substitution. The sages taught in a brayta, and the sages with regard to the animal tithe, he shall not inquire whether it's good or bad, neither shall he substitute it, and if he substituted at all, then both it and that substituted shall be sacred, it shall not be redeemed. Verses 27-30. The issue of substitution stated here in connection to the animal tithe is an already stated earlier, he shall not alter it, or substitute a good for bad or bad for good. And if he substitutes an animal for an animal, then both it and that for which it is substituted shall be sacred. Verses 27:10. Since it is stated, he shall not alter it nor substitute it, the verse apparently indicates that all types of offerings are included, whether an individual offering or a communal offering, and whether it is an offering sacrificed on the altar or an offering consecrated to temple maintenance. Therefore, the verse states with regard to the animal tithe, you do not inquire. Rabbi Shimon said in explanation, the animal tithe is included in the category of all offerings, and why was it singled out? It is to tell you that just the animal tithe is an individual offering and an offering sacrificed on the altar, and it's an item that comes as an obligation, not as a gift offering, and it is an item that is not brought in partnership, but only by an individual. So too, all offerings that render their substitute sacred must be an individual offering and an offering sacrificed on the altar, and it must be an item that comes only as an obligation, and must be an item that is not brought in partnership. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says, why was the animal tithe singled out of all offerings as subject to substitution? Now, after the halacha of substitution stated in general, it serves to discuss a special halacha with regard to the animal tithe, that of the substitution of its name. Even the animals emerged from the pen to be tithed, one counting them erred and calls the 10th animal the 9th, and the 11th the 10th. They are both sanctified. The animal that actually emerges 10th is the animal tithe, while the 11th animal is consecrated as a peace offering. And since the halacha of substitution of its name applies only to the animal tithe, it is necessary to teach that the general halacha of substitution of its body, like regular substitution, applies to it as well. Furthermore, the verse tells you other halachot unique to the animal tithe. An animal that is a substitute of the name of an animal tithe is sacrificed upon the altar as a peace offering, whereas the substitute of its body is not sacrificed at all. But for all other offering, substitutes hold the same status as the animal for which they were substituted. Another difference is that the substitute of the name of an animal tithe is redeemed when it develops a blemish, like a peace offering, and the proceeds of the sale belong to the temple treasury, whereas the substitute of its body is not redeemed. As is stated with regard to the animal tithe, then both it and that for which its substitute shall be sacred, and shall not be redeemed in Leviticus 27:33. Finally, the sanctity of the substitution of the body of an animal tithe takes effect upon both an item that is fit for sacrifice upon the altar and upon an item that is unfit for sacrifice. Rashi explains that an example of this item which is unfit for sacrifice is a blemished animal, and the reason that the halacha of animal tithe applies even to a blemished animal. Others explain that although it is stated with regard to substitution, nor substituted good for bad, Leviticus 27:10, nevertheless, if one did so, the substitution takes effect, including the case of a blemished animal. Rabbeinu and Gershom Mohago, the commentaries raise a difficulty with Rashi's interpretation that this halacha is due to the fact that the substitution of the body of an animal tithe is like the animal tithe itself. They point out that there is no difference between the animal tithe and other offerings in this regard, since all types of substitution take effect, even with regard to blemished animals. Furthermore, one cannot compare the halacha that the sanctity of animal tithe applies to blemished animals to substitute with blemished animals, until itself sanctifies the 10th animal, whereas the sanctity of substitution is affected by the decision of the individual performing substitution, says the Grid. E.g., a blemished animal, as the sanctity of the animal tithe can apply even to a blemished animal, the substitution of its name is fixed only upon an item that is fit for sacrifice. If the animal was mistakenly called the 10th, is blemished, it is not consecrated. The sage's same response to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Simply because the verse 1 includes a unique halacha with regard to the animal tithe, and it has substitution of its name, would one assume that it is diminished and halacha of regular substitution does not apply? To the Gemara answers yes. one can make such a claim, as we say, that which the verse included with regard to particular halacha, it included, and that which it did not include, it did not include. Since the passage initially addressed the substitution of names solely with regard to the animal tithe, one could assume that this is the only substitution that applies to it. The Gemara asks, and from where would this be derived? That in this case, we should assume only that which is specifically mentioned. Yeshua said, this derives since this is the case of a matter, i.e. the animal tithe, whereas the Torah comes to discuss a novel matter, i.e. the substitution of name, and as a rule, in such cases, the object of discussion has only its novelty. What does that mean? The 13 hermeneutical principles of Rabbi Shimon include a similar principle. With regard to a matter that was included in a generalization when emerged into discuss a new matter, like you stated, in reference to a new matter, one cannot return to its generalization until the Torah explicitly returns to its generalization. Slightly different version of this principle appears in the Jewish Talmud with regard to any matter that was included in the generalization. When emerged to discuss a new matter, it is removed from the generalization and stands in its novelty, and that's pair 1-4. The two basic aspects of this principle. First of all, the novel case are no longer derived from the generalization. Second aspect depends on a dispute in Yevamot 7b as to whether the halacha concerning the generalization can be derived from the novel case. There are instances where one does not derive halacha from the novel case. For example, there is a prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a brother's wife, which was prohibited like all of those whom intercourse is forbidden. Considering this prohibition, the verse then emerged to discuss a new matter. The prohibition was overridden with regard to the mitzvah of Levite marriage, where a husband dies childless. One does not learn from here that the mitzvah of Levite marriage applies to all of those with whom intercourse is forbidden. There is a dispute as to the definition of a matter that emerged from generalization. Some say that it is limited where the novel case directly contradicts the generalization from which it emerged. If the novel case merely adds to the generalization, it is not considered an exception that emerged from it, as was in Yevamot 7b and Zevachim 49a. See the literature on the hermeneutical principles. Others maintain that the principle includes even a case where a new halacha was added that was not in the generalization, provided that this addition does not appear in that generalization or elsewhere. Some Kedoshim. According to his opinion, the animal tithe is included in this principle, as halacha of substitution of his name applies only to the animal tithe. It does contend that this issue of whether a case that adds to but does not contradict generalization considered novelty and emerges from generalization is a dispute between the Tanaim. Upon the Jewish Talmud, Talmudot. And one cannot infer the applicability of additional principles. It was therefore necessary for a verse to teach that substitution of body, which applies to all offerings, applies to the animal tithe as well. Rav Naaman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said earlier that the halacha of substitution applies only to offerings that come as an obligation, should one conclude that it is only an obligatory burnt offering that renders an animal exchange for a substitute, but a voluntary burnt offering does not. Rava said to him, a voluntary burnt offering also falls in the category of obligatory offerings, since he has accepted upon himself to bring a voluntary burnt offering, considered an obligation for him, and therefore renders an animal exchange for a substitute. Rava adds, on this qualification mentioned by Rabbi Shimon, is necessary only to exclude a burnt offering that came from surplus funds. What does this mean? Dim hamosaros, the surplus funds of fixed sin offerings, unlike with guilt offerings, are allocated for communal gift offerings. This is according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Nahadea, in Shivot 7b, 12b, Ram Mateva Vod Hilcha, Zukim Makdushin. For example, if one set aside a certain sum of money for a sin offering or guilt offering, and after purchasing his animal, some of the money remained, he must purchase a burnt offering that money. The halacha substitution does not apply to such an animal. The Gemara raises a difficulty. The sages disputed the use of surplus money. Some say that it must go toward the purchase of communal burnt offerings, whereas Rabbi Eliezer maintains that the owner himself must purchase a voluntary burnt offering. What does Rabbi Shimon hold in this regard? If he holds in accordance with the one who says that the surplus must go to communal gift offerings, Allah subsequently states explicitly in 20b with regard to substitutes of guilt offerings that are consigned to grazing. In addition, it includes the surplus funds of other offerings that are allocated to communal gift offerings. For example, if one set aside coins for his sin offering and they were lost, and separated other coins in their stead before he brought a sin offering with them, the first coins were found, which is stated in 22b, states that he brings a sin offering with both sets of coins, and the remainder is allocated for communal gift offerings in Rabbeinu Hananel. Then it is obvious that this offering does not render a substitute, as it is explicitly taught that there is no substitution with regard to communal offering. Rabbi Shimon's status would then be redundant. Rather, say that Rabbi Shimon holds in accordance with the one who says that these surplus funds go toward the voluntary burnt offering of an individual. This is too problematic, as to whom do we hear holds this reasoning? It is Rabbi Eliezer. But we heard that Rabbi Eliezer explicitly stated that such an animal renders an animal exchange for it a substitute, as the Torah that a burnt offering that came from surplus funds renders a non-sacred animal that is exchanged for it consecrated as a substitute. This is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon holds, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer with regard to one matter, that surplus funds go toward an individual burnt offering, and disagrees with him with regard to another matter. Rabbi Eliezer maintains that a burnt offering that came from surplus funds renders a non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute, and he, Rabbi Shimon, maintains that it does not render it a substitute. And the Gemara objects, if so, consider that dilemma raised by Rabbi Avin. If one separated an animal as a guilt offering by which to achieve atonement, and he felt substitution for it, then that original guilt offering developed a blemish, and he redeemed it with another animal, which he subsequently lost, and the owner achieved atonement by bringing yet another animal as a guilt offering, and then this lost animal was found and consigned to be sacrificed as a burnt offering, or the law as to whether he can again effect substitution for it. In this case, one question is a burnt offering that came from surplus funds. In accordance with whose opinion was this dilemma raised? If we say it's in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, you said that Rabbi Shimon maintains that a burnt offering that came from surplus funds does not render non-sacred animal exchange for it a substitute. There would therefore be no dilemma at all. This is problematic because the dilemma assumes that one cannot effect substitution twice for the same animal, which is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara explained that this dilemma that Rabbi Avin was raising, if a Tana is found to hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who said that one cannot effect substitution once and again effect substitution with the same consecrated animal, he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who said that a burnt offering that came from surplus funds rendered a non-sacred animal exchange for a substitute. What is his opinion as to whether one can again effect substitution with the animal in question? As explained earlier in 9b, Rabbi Avin's dilemma was first posed with regard to two bodies, i.e. two different animals and one type of sanctity, e.g. in a case where one separated an animal as a guilt offering and he effected substitution for it, the animal he separated as a guilt offering developed a blemish and redeemed it with another animal which assumed the same status of a guilt offering. What is halacha as to whether one can substitute this for this replacement? Do we say that since it is a different animal from the one which he initially effected substitution, second substitution is effective, or perhaps since it possesses the same sanctity of the original animal, one cannot effect substitution for it? And then Rabbi Avin further asked, if we say that in the above case one cannot effect substitution for the animal, perhaps this is only because two animals possess one sanctity. But in the case of two sanctities in one body, what is the halacha? For example, if one consecrated a guilt offering and effected substitution for it, and then he subsequently lost and atoned using another animal, and then he found it again, such that the original animal must now be consigned to be sacrificed as a burnt offering, does one say that since the animal now possesses a different sanctity, he can effect further substitution for it? The Gemara concludes, and according to that Tana, the dilemma shall remain unresolved. Tibaye. What's a tibaye? This is a passive form equivalent to the more prevalent term, the dilemma shall stand tiku, as shall stand to be asked without resolution. Others explain that this is an active verb, go and ask us of many sages, and that you will thereby discover the truth. Rashi, Rabbeinu, Ma'ili, and Shita Mishim Beses. That's the end of the Omid. I'm just going to read the summary because we've come to the end of the first parak, the first chapter. This chapter concluded that any adult member of the Jewish people, man or woman, non-priest or priest alike, can perform substitution. Only the owner of the offering can effect substitution, since in general one can consecrate only that which belongs to him. Consequently, the priest cannot perform substitution even for this offering from which they benefit in practice, as the offerings belong to them only after their sacrifice. The priest cannot even substitute for a firstborn which is given as a gift to the priest. That said, if one gives an offering of another to atone thereby, it is the one atoning, not the original owner, has the ability to perform substitution, as in part the offering is considered to be his. Substitution can be performed by an individual, but partners and all the more so a community cannot substitute for their animals. The chapter to clarify that the halacha of substitution applies only to animal offerings, did not apply to bird meat offering, libations, animal consecrated for sacrifice or other consecrated items, is derived from the verse in Leviticus 27:10-33, that one can perform substitution for any consecrated animal, even if it is blemished after its consecration. Likewise, the substitute can be any non-sacred animal, even a blemished one unfit for the altar. Furthermore, an animal offering renders a non-sacred animal in exchange for the substitute, or the male or female from sheep, goats, or cattle. There is also no distinction in this regard between an offering of lesser sanctity and an offering of the most sacred order. One cannot substitute for a limb of a sacrificial animal. One cannot substitute for a fetus inside an offering's womb. Likewise, one cannot consecrate limbs and fetuses of non-sacred animals through substitution. Additionally, although a substitute is fully sacred, the extent that in certain cases is sacrificed upon the altar, its consecration is of a different nature than that of the original animal, and one cannot effect substitution for a substitute as one can for an animal consecrated on its own. Incidental to this last halacha, the chapter cites in this case when an item has been affected in some manner, in regard to sanctification or which impurity cannot similarly affect other items in turn. Even though one cannot substitute for a substitute animal, one can substitute many animals for one sacrificial animal or one non-sacred animal for many sacrificial animals. The fundamental issue of the halacha efficiency of prohibited acts was debated at length in the chapter, as the discussion was established that different conclusions apply to different various areas of halacha. In each case of halacha is based on a unique source in the verse. That's the end of the chapter. I wish you a very good day and peace.